The big finale. Probably one of the most, if not the most, anticipated finishes to a video game trilogy to date. I mean, I heard everyone talking about it, everyone waiting for it. It was huge news when they changed plot elements after the private beta ended up leaking an early script for the game. Normally, it seems like most devs would just grit their teeth and wait it out when that happens so soon before the intended launch. But here with Mass Effect 3, it was so important for the third act of the series to end with some big reveals and surprises. Now, what changed when, what was originally intended, and what was cut down because of the short development time is super unclear, unfortunately. Yep, that's right. Another one for the list of games rushed out unfinished. Wiki says Mass Effect 1 took 3.5 years to develop. Mass Effect 2 releases 2010, so that's roughly 3 years to work on it. Mass Effect 3 is set to release 2011, but gets delayed until March of 2012 thanks to BioWare's general manager, Aaron Flynn. So that's a game with basically a year and a half of development, with another half a year extra, barely secured by BioWare. This leaves the huge finale of the trilogy with less development time than any other previous entry in the franchise. A franchise, I might add, with 80 plus hours of choices that were all supposed to have consequences for Mass Effect 3's plot. I don't know how EA thought this was gonna work out. Oh, no wait, I absolutely do. They just didn't give a shit. Everyone already pre-ordered the game, and it's the last in a trilogy, so there's no fourth one that needs hyping up. EA's already got the money, whether you like the game or not. There's literally no reason for a profit-motivated company to not screw you over in this instance. A free market libertarian type might even say they were obligated to their shareholders to screw you over. All this together makes it very difficult to parse what's the fault of limited time, bad decisions, publisher interference, or last-minute changes. Everyone seems to have contradictory claims as to what reasons apply to which problems with Mass Effect 3. For example, I often hear that the indoctrination theory ending was cut because of beta leak changes. But that doesn't seem to be the case at all. Skimming through it again years later, it's not all that different in terms of overarching plot, and a lot of the changes seem to be centered around different twists to smaller choices. For example, Primarch Victus ordering his son to be executed in the original script. Now, one explanation, obviously, is the official BioWare statement that the indoctrination ending was only ever a fan theory, and not something the devs originally intended. Though, to play devil's advocate, EA has, in the past, specifically blocked developers from revealing original game concepts that might anger fans. And if there was any situation in which EA would be tempted to do that, then Mass Effect 3 would be it. Then, going along with the idea that the indoctrination theory might still be true, I think either it must have been cut way earlier, or for some reason purposely missing from the leaked script. And while it would certainly be a smart move to leak a script intentionally missing the quote-unquote true ending, I kinda doubt that's what happened, unless we're also going to go as far as to say all this was some kind of secret marketing ploy that was planned from the start, which if so, bit them in the ass, though again, I really doubt that this is what happened. Oh, and I guess I've been talking about this as if everyone knows what the indoctrination theory is, which is kind of a dumb assumption considering there's probably a bunch of new Mass Effect fans due to the Legendary Edition. The indoctrination theory is a fan response to a bunch of strange choices and seemingly unfinished elements in Mass Effect 3. It is not, as a lot of people have claimed, a way to just retcon an ending people don't like, because if the indoctrination theory is true, then it isn't a new ending, it's just a more accurate perspective on the ending we got. So basically, the gist is this. Shepard is constantly exposed to Reapers and Reaper technology that should, over the years, have taken control over their mind in the same way that indoctrination affects others. Now, certainly some resistance can be explained by exposure to the Prothean artifact in one, Shepard being in constant direct conflict with the Reapers, being incredibly high-willed, and just some general hand-waving because Shepard is the protagonist and controlled by a player who is not indoctrinated. But by the third game, these explanations are stretching thin. It's like watching a character get punched repeatedly without ever reacting. The indoctrination theory posits that this is happening to Shepard by 3, that this child Shepard continues to see after the tragedy of Earth is a representation of his indoctrination. A child no one else notices or sees, who is one of the only characters to have an animation where they climb into a shuttle without being assisted by someone. A child that the Reaper intelligence takes the form of at the end in order to emotionally relate to Shepard. And after Shepard is knocked out, Anderson somehow arrives at the Crucible after Shepard, but gets to the controls before them, even though there's only one path to it.
Anderson. You up here too?
Followed you up, but we didn't come out in the same place. Oh, at least I don't think we did. What's your surrounding look like? There's a chasm here, and more hallways like the one I was in.
I think I'm near an exit.
I see something up ahead. Might be a way to cross over.
Don't get too far ahead of me.
Where do you think you're at?
Just found that chasm we're talking about.
Hold on. I see something. A control panel, maybe. I'm just gonna go on ahead.
Plus, while you're there, they very clearly play indoctrination audio cues constantly throughout this conversation. Sounds we also hear during Shepard's nightmares, in which they chase that same kid. And back to the ending, Shepard mysteriously receives a wound in the exact same spot they shoot Anderson, despite not ever having shown Shepard getting injured there. Now, the problem is there's a ton of other evidence that people bring up, which doesn't make any sense. Shepard's armor changing, unlimited ammo, blah blah blah, these are all clearly just gameplay mechanics. And unfortunately, no matter how cool you think the indoctrination theory is, and I certainly think it's cool enough to talk about 9 years later, you start to notice that maybe like 75% of the discussion about it is centered around these misconceptions of where the game mechanics end and the actual Mass Effect setting begins. That, along with BioWare just out and out stating the indoctrination theory isn't true, makes it feel incredibly clear that this is all just a fan theory based on coincidence. Which isn't at all uncommon. There's tons of games, movies, shows, and books where lots of elements just happen to follow an unintended pattern. I mean, we're human beings. Creating patterns and detecting patterns is literally a thing we've been evolved to do, sometimes to our own detriment. That being said, there's one last bit that throws all that out the window for me. There's one major aspect about Mass Effect 3 that only makes sense if the indoctrination theory is true. And that's that the Destroy the Reaper's choice is the only ending where Shepard is shown to live. Even though it's specifically stated that the Destroy All Reapers choice will kill Shepard by destroying their cybernetics. Without indoctrination theory, there is no possible explanation for this. I haven't heard anyone give a convincing argument for how this could have happened. And what makes it weirder is that it goes against all the themes and morals Mass Effect has been building up. Let's switch perspectives and look at this as if the indoctrination theory is wrong, which again is probably the case, considering BioWare's statement. Shouldn't the synthesis ending be the one where Shepard lives? I mean, throughout all of Mass Effect, the message is very clear. Monsters are just people whose motivations we don't understand. The Geth, the Rachni, the Collectors, Saren, even the Reapers are all presented by BioWare as being outwardly monstrous, but with some kind of sympathetic backstory that paints them as either victims of a larger evil. This would be Geth heretics believing the Reapers can save their race, to the Rachni being manipulated by Leviathans, to Collectors being genetically altered into servants for the Reapers. Or it presents them as believing they're doing the right thing, but due to errors of judgment and lack of long-term consideration, committing evil instead. This would be Saren believing he was saving all life, the Reapers believing they were saving all life, or the Lucid Man believing he was saving all human life. It's very clear throughout every entry that Mass Effect rewards you for trusting in other people's freedom, making unusual bonds, and generally everyone coming together to be greater as a whole. You know, basically everything the synthesis choice is supposed to stand for. But come 2012, I finish my first playthrough of 3, immediately go for the synthesis ending. Feel actually pretty good about the result. I'm very into transhumanism, so as far as my playthrough went, I thought it all worked out rather nicely. Cut to the next day when I find out that no, actually, it's only the brute force, aggressive, violent, kill 'em all ending that the game rewards you for? And I'm phrasing that very specifically because it is a reward to present an ending where your character survives. It literally releases happy chemicals in most people's brains. Now, I'm not one of those people who goes back and changes my ending just because I got one I didn't like. As far as I'm concerned, if I messed up, then that's on me. Until I replay the game, I gotta live with that. But almost always, I know why I messed up. The game does at least something to convey where I went wrong or what I should have thought of. With Mass Effect 3, 9 years later, and I still don't understand where my thinking went wrong, or why the synthesis ending is presented as a bad end. I cannot for the life of me wrap my brain around any explanation for why the BioWare devs would pick the Destroy ending as the one where Shepard wakes up unless the indoctrination theory is true. I have literally nothing. Especially since there was a lot of talk about making the twist that the Reapers were actually the good guys somehow. Which, again, would make you think the devs were leaning towards the synthesis ending as the good one. And so I feel like I am forced to believe the indoctrination theory, because at least it makes some sense. It adds up in places even if I know it's not actually intended. I'm not saying the official ending is bad. What I'm saying is that the official ending doesn't function. It's like a math problem that someone didn't finish. And it's because of this that I don't want to talk about the ending or the indoctrination theory when discussing how the game could have been better. Because it's so jumbled and broken and makes so little sense no matter what you believe that I don't think there's any way of fixing it without drastically restructuring the entirety of the game. So let's talk about that instead. First off, before I say what I think should have been cut, changed, or added, we have to talk about what needs to stay. Because Mass Effect 3 did a lot more right than I think most people give it credit for. First example, the multiplayer. Now, don't roll your eyes at me. Yes, tying war readiness to multiplayer was a terrible idea, but to be fair, that's less of a problem with multiplayer and more of a problem with single player. A problem which Legendary Edition fixes easily. Unfortunately, what Legendary Edition does not do is include the multiplayer as a standalone. And it's unfortunate because it was actually really good, even playing by yourself. There was a ton of character variety, weapon variety, leveling up felt rewarding, and the arenas and objectives were pretty engaging. In fact, you can still see remnants of this in the single player, because many tiny missions in 3 are reused multiplayer maps, and they play way better than a lot of those tiny side missions from 2 that just felt like busy work. Really, the only problem with it was the early loot box microtransaction stuff. And as I mentioned before, the multiplayer element was probably the only reason why there's such a great diversity in gear in 3 compared to the others. I guarantee you that the firearm selection would be halved or more if there was never a multiplayer element, and I'd be very willing to bet that the attachment system wouldn't have been a thing either. The attachment system in particular breathes a bit of fresh air into combat that has gotten kind of stale by the 3rd entry. Though, to be fair, I think it could have been developed more, like how Andromeda implements it. I mean, say what you will about Mass Effect Andromeda, but you can't deny its combat mechanics feel a lot more developed than 3's. Area variety is another big one that I think multiplayer might have had a hand in. I don't hear many people talk about it, but playing all the games back to back, it's super clear how many more unique environments there are in 3 compared to the last 2 games. Mass Effect 1 used a lot of copy and paste bases of filler. And Mass Effect 2 did the same thing with these modular housing units and standardized base architecture. 3 retains some of that, but even when it does, the game makes sure to place these copy and paste elements onto unique natural features with tons of background conflict, adding stressful ambience. I've beaten 1 maybe 8 or 9 times, 2 maybe 5 or 6 times, and this will be my 3rd playthrough through 3. Plus, it's been long enough that there's quite a bit of content in the game I just genuinely don't remember. Especially the slew of little nasty side quests I hate. But yet, pretty much every single planet or area I get to, I actually remember. It's such a weird feeling I generally never have with games I don't like, especially considering it's my least played entry in the series. Especially considering it's the one I haven't replayed in probably, maybe 7 years? Maybe I'm making more out of this than there is. I guess the way I'd put it is it feels like they went all out on creating as many unique area assets and memorable locations as they could. Maybe it was considered a big priority during development, or maybe it was just something they finished first, so it didn't suffer from the rushed launch. Either way, I have to give Mass Effect 3 credit for its scenes, and not just the landscapes. The cutscenes have gotten a big boost. No longer are there a million copy and paste generic action shots. Every cutscene in Mass Effect 3 looks fairly unique, and they're actually used in this game to convey information, context, and even some sometimes awkward fight scenes. As opposed to cutscenes in the previous games being more to convey an entrance or an exit to a mission. That being said, I can't help but think that this might have been a big part of the reason why there's way less dialogue choices. Yeah, that's the thing you'll notice. Shepard just talks and talks and talks, pausing maybe half as much as previous games. It's actually really jarring on the first mission to Mars because I'd forgot that this was a thing Mass Effect 3 did. I kept feeling like I'd skipped through a choice somehow, which is not helped by how often the lip syncing starts before audio glitch appears, making me think my dialogue scenes are skipping around somehow? But no, throughout most of the game, Shepard just says whatever they want. No, I'm not saying Shepard starts making choices in place of you, but it's a pretty disingenuous thing to do for a game that's sold on its choose-your-own-adventure elements. The pacing obviously differs even just an hour in, and I remember it being pretty big gaming news right after release. Like, what did they think was gonna happen? Or, I guess it's just another fault of the game being unfinished. See, that's the big problem with lack of transparency on companies like this. It's impossible to tell what's a bad design decision and what's just the best they could do with the time they had. And it becomes even harder because I know every second I'm not talking about how bad the ending is, Mass Effect fans will just be fixated on why I'm not doing that. It's a game where to talk about it, you have to talk about talking about Mass Effect 3 whenever you touch anything even remotely controversial or conflicted. So instead of continuing on about the ending ad infinitum, or talking about the lack of dialogue, or really any of the typical Mass Effect 3 subjects, rather let's briefly consider the part of the game that I think needs the most tweaking. And that's the beginning. I've always been really lucky in that my dad was a gamer, and I remember having a phone call with him at some point after Legendary Edition's release, where he mentioned something along the lines of, I got through the first 2, started up 3, and I forgot it began with the Reapers immediately. I mean, the game's basically over right at the beginning. And at first I took sort of a defensive stance. Well, 2's DLC ends with the Reapers about to arrive, so it kinda makes sense logically that they'd show up so soon. And it's not really over because you still have to gather up all the war assets. But then after thinking about it for a bit, it is really weird from a storytelling perspective. You get dropped into such an extreme situation that the whole rest of the game basically pales in comparison. It's like if Apocalypse Now started with 30 minutes of Colonel Kurtz dancing around and talking about how a soldier is going to come try and assassinate him. Or if in Avengers Infinity War, Thanos had just shown up in the first 5 minutes with every single Infinity Stone ready to go. But here's the thing, what I want to happen before the Reapers arrive at Earth is already in the game. I don't have to just make it up from scratch. It's the Leviathan DLC, an investigation-heavy series of missions that psychotically was locked behind a paywall. God, all of you who just started on Mass Effect with Legendary Edition have no idea how stupidly greedy the paid content was for this game. Sure, worse practices started cropping up after Mass Effect 3, but just because the bar keeps getting set lower doesn't mean we should retroactively consider less bad stuff good. Digression aside, the Leviathan DLC is the perfect build-up to the Reaper invasion, and would give a great chance to showcase it happening in progress. There's this whole mechanic in Mass Effect 3 where some star systems are Reaper territory and some free, with ownership shifting a bit over time as you complete missions. But what I'm imagining is, as you're trying to chase this Leviathan down, slowly Reapers encroach further and further from Batarian space. The military score or galactic readiness that you build up as you play would determine how many systems are taken by Reapers every time they push the front line forward, with entering Reaper systems being much more dangerous. For example, maybe your fuel is only spent when you're running the stealth drive in hostile star systems. Because, let's be honest, fuel consumption doesn't add anything challenging or fun to the game, it just wastes your time flying back and forth to resupply. Also, this way BioWare can play around way more with its favorite plot element, having nobody believe you as the big baddies hang out right on the galactic doorstep. It'd give a way better explanation for why the Quarians decided now was really the time to commit to a big war with the Geth. It'd also make carrying the Genophage much more directly relevant, since in this version the war can be written to last years. By the way, that was always a big question I had. The conflict between the Reapers and Protheans was described by Javik as lasting more than a century. Yet, apparently our galactic cycle nails them in, what, months? At most a year? Looking at the big picture like this, it's as if we curb stomped the Reapers. I mean, the Rachni War and the Krogan Rebellion both lasted longer than the Reaper War, apparently. The Reapers had been around for millions if not billions of years. To them, the events of Mass Effect 3 were like a blink of the eye. So basically, from the perspective of the Reapers, they show up and then are instantly destroyed with an incredibly short, though bloody war. That's such shoddy writing. I mean, come on, it makes the main antagonists feel like just some rando punks who get their asses handed to them. How about instead include a bunch of time jumps? Have the galaxy change as your investigation starts, progresses, wraps up, and the war really kicks off. And in this alternate game order, that war should kick off halfway through. So you get to spend time seeing the galaxy both on the brink of conflict and later in the midst of disaster, so that the war is emphasized as being that much more horrific. The first investigation half is also the perfect place to move most of the Cerberus content, including the Citadel coup mission and the Tachanka bomb mission. The Genophage mission being what I choose as the gateway to the second half of Mass Effect 3 because it's this huge accomplishment you've been hearing about for 2 games. And I can't think of any moment that would get darkened more by the Reapers suddenly showing up to crash the celebrations. Because that's kind of the thing. I think there is a great game in Mass Effect 3. None of the pieces are wrong. The beats are okay and the gameplay is decent, if a bit repetitive at this point, but it's all jumbled up in the wrong order, and with so many bits slotted in poorly that when you finish it, it comes off as more of a mess than it actually is. Though, for all of this to work, they'd actually have to offer DLC content as base game content. And considering Mass Effect 3 was one of the first big loot box games, that seems like an uphill battle. Something tells me it's more likely that Mass Effect 4 makes the indoctrination ending canon than anything like that ever happening under EA's watch. But hey, who knows? We're starting on a new trilogy now, turning over a new leaf. That being said, considering that almost every article or discussion I've seen about the upcoming Mass Effect 4 focuses on 3's ending being disappointing, I'm a little worried that maybe this malignant wound of a finale is going to drive the game down poor paths out of fear of pissing off fans again. What I hope instead, and I beg any Mass Effect fan to do is, instead of picturing Mass Effect 3 and thinking bad ending, think rushed ending. Because if there's one thing above all that I know for sure would ruin Mass Effect 4, it's EA rushing the release.